Have you ever played a game where you absolutely love 90% of it and it just looks and plays and feels absolutely fantastic, but then the last 10% of its kind of content is full of intricacies or weirdness or awkward gameplay mechanics or just something that you just go, why did you do it like that? And then that gradually over time starts to chip away and make you like feel quite irksome. That's how I feel around Cursed to Golf, a game that I largely really approve of and recommend to most people, but with caveats on a few weird irksome issues that drove me up the wall. So I'm going to go through this all in turn, and hopefully this will help you decide whether or not you want to buy it now, wait for a bit of a sale, or perhaps these things would be deal breakers for you and you'd want to avoid it. In Cursed to Golf, you play as a golfer that gets struck by lightning and dies, and you get sent to Golf Purgatory. This means that you have to survive 18 levels of golfing as a 2D platformer to try and escape from hell and ascend back into reality in the real world again. These 18 holes are handmade, but they're picked from a random selection every time you play the game, from about 75-ish holes in total. So you'll get to see familiar themes and familiar layouts and designs, but crucially this avoids you diving down an RNG rabbit hole where you can get terribly designed levels. These are handcrafted and it shows. So what this means is that each level you'll start out with either a driver, iron or a wedge, and those are your three clubs that are available, and it's very old school 90s press a button, watch the meter go up and down for power, and then you'll kind of go up and down for angle. So it kind of reminds me of games like Olympic Gold or PGA Tour Golf like 96 and things like that, where it was by the meter, not by how you'd flick an analog stick or anything like that. So it keeps it quite binary and quite easy to decide how your course shots are going to go. The key with all of these holes though is that they're weird and wonderful and full of interesting traits and tricks. So there'll be water hazards, there'll be graveyard hazards where a zombie will grab and catch the ball, spikes will impale the ball, there'll be like windpipes that will blow your ball in certain directions, or like sucky pipes that will suck it in and spit it out in another part of the level. There's transporters that will teleport you from one area to another. And then there's like bounce pads that allow you to quickly then decide where you want to bounce your ball to next, for example. All of these things make up the weird and wonderful ways how each level is built. And because you start off initially with every level with 5 shots, you can very rarely get to the end of a hole in 5 shots. So you'll be using your roguelike cards, as it's a little mini deck builder here going on in the background, to alter what's going on either with your ball or your shot rate and what the par is, so that you can then keep going. There's over 20 cards in total, and these range from things like adding another shot or 3 shots or 5 or 6 shots to your score, so that gives you more time to try and complete the level. Or it could be things like exploding TNT crates that were within a certain radius of you. Or you can change the direction of a ball mid-air, or you can choose to make it drop from gravity in mid-air, which is really great if you're going to try and hit that over like a small gap and drop it down a very narrow hole, thus skipping a third of the level and meaning that you don't have to spend your cards for extra shots on par, for example. It works really well as an ecosystem, and some cards are much more valuable for me than others. A couple of the really, really good ones that I found juicy and useful were the practice shots and the mulligans, because if you bugger up a shot, and it's very easy to do if you get your timing wrong, you can quickly rewind and have another go at it without having too much of a impact on your score as you go. When you get to the end of each hole, if depending on how many shots you've kind of got left, then translates to cash, and then you'll get in your little golf buggy and you'll zoom along to the next hole. And at different points in the course, you'll get forks in the path. So you can choose whether you want to go for a hole or whether you want to go to the shop, but then take on a cursed hole, which gives extra special effects such as rain, flicking the camera upside down, forcing you to use drivers or wedges instead of irons. All of that stuff's kind of there and available. and you get to decide which way you go, which is quite cool. But what you'll be doing is trying to keep as many bonus extra shots and under par as possible, so that translates to money, so that when you get to the shops you can buy more cards. These cards only last for your single round of golf, and you only keep going until you run out of shots, which then means you die. And then you get sent back to the beginning. That means you lose all of your cards, that means you lose all of your money, no progress is carried over. The only way how you can try and carry over stuff in between runs is if you use your card binder. And you can only do this in shops, and it basically means that any cards that you think, oh, do you know what, this is getting difficult and hard and I want to save some of these cards for a future run, pop them in your binder. You can't use them for this specific run, but then when you get to a shop again in a future run, you can whip them out the card binder and put them back into your deck. And it's quite handy because you get given cards in like packs of 1, 2, 3 or 4, and so sometimes you might get a bit of a load of a certain type, particularly U-balls I found, where you can change the direction of a ball mid-air. So I'd end up putting them all in my binder, and then I'd be fine to then pull them out for future runs. This all works really, really well, and combined with the excellent pixel art and a really, really catchy chiptune soundtrack, I'm a big fan of the soundtrack of this game. It's kind of Scottish swanky clubhouse type music. It's quite fun. All of this just works really, really well. But then there's 2 very specific issues that I have with this game that combine together to increase the rage and frustration that gets more and more tricky as you progress through the game. The first one is around viewing stuff. You can only view around the level by pressing a zoom out button and then moving the camera around. But you don't get to see, particularly if you're using drivers and irons and you're going at full pelt, you can't see exactly where your ball is going to land. And this seems like the biggest oversight that could possibly be ever made in a golf game that wants you to be precise. It feels grossly unfair, and you can try and line stuff up and go, oh, I'm kind of ham-fisting it there, but these levels later on become very, very dependent on you being able to be precise, and then as your ball is in the air, you can press and hammer. I was using the PlayStation controller, so I was hammering X on my controller, so that you can then build up momentum to kind of do a little after touch correction once your ball hits the ground to roll it left or right. Now that's fine, but it doesn't matter anything if you can't see where you're going to land in the first place, and you cannot get around this, and it's really frustrating. How a precision platformer cannot allow you to see where you're going to land, I don't understand, and it was the bane of most of my frustrations with Curse to Golf. This then gets impacted with the second problem, and that is that Curse to Golf is very narrow, and by that I mean level design. So you can't get big height and big wind and get far in places because the ceilings are too low too often, but sometimes you're having to try and judge it half-assed because you can't see where you're going to go, and these two things kind of combine, and quite often I would end up in like a weird slot where I'd accidentally graze a wall, didn't think I was going to but grazed it anyway, then the ball drops down and then it would drop down into like a corner, which then means that your next shot is hitting the wall next to the corner to bounce it back so that you can then clear the wall with the wedge, and it compounds affects each other, and it feels grossly unfair for a game that is already difficult to begin with. And so if you think that combination of not being able to see where you land plus the narrow and low hanging ceilings getting in the way and causing some issues, if you think those are going to just send you into a rage fest, don't touch this game. It will drive you up the wall. Thankfully, I was able to see the humorous and sadistic side to this game design feature, bug, issue, lacking, not sure, and was able to work my magic and try and get my way around it. But it gets more and more progressively in your face as you get into, say, like the second area where you're in the desert, and then in a third area where you progress on further. The level design is longer levels, more complex scenery and objects to get in your way, which then means that you really have to be precise and you can't ham-fist it, and this game won't allow you to not. So yeah, I feel like this desperately needs a zoom in and out feature that isn't accessible whilst you're doing a shot, because it feels unfair otherwise. If you don't mind that though, the rest of this game is an absolute fantastic representation of golf, roguelites, and platforming, and a little bit of deck building, all smashed into one. It sounds like it shouldn't work. It absolutely does, so long as you know about those issues going in advance. Hopefully they'll solve them. They've already sorted out some of the zooming stuff and given extra things post-release on a patch, but it's just not in the way how it helps with an actual shot, if that makes sense. So yeah. Written review will be over on highplanegames.com. Hope that was informative and interesting. I appreciate it was a bit ranty, but it's one of those things where you're just like, oh, if you solved that, this would be an 8.59 out of 10. And at the moment, I don't feel comfortable giving that score with this current problem. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.